is on board. Let's go ahead and get Will Ford up if he's available, and move on with him and your exciting guest. Will, welcome to the show, and unmute yourself so we can. And I want to thank you so much for being on board when I was gone, and having Secretary King with us this week. I'm going to turn it over to both of you all, and take it away.
Good afternoon, sir. How you doing today?
Doing well. Good to see you. Glad to be on.
Thank you. Now, got to give a little preamble. Is that for folks who may not want, they're wondering, well, where does secretary come from? The title. Mm-hmm. Well, you were education secretary under President Obama. How many people get to work with President Obama? So before we get into it, can you give a summary of what it was like to work with him?
Fantastic, of course. I mean, he's just a brilliant person, an extraordinary leader. I had the privilege of being Secretary of Education, an issue about which he is very passionate. Mrs. Obama is very passionate. The other thing that's so wonderful about them is that they have stayed regular people, despite being, global celebrities, despite all the trappings of the presidency. They always stayed regular people focused on raising their daughters and trying to figure out how to make government a force for good in people's lives.
Thank you, sir. Now, okay, go for it. Why in the world do you want to campaign across the state for governor?
Yeah. Well, look, my deciding to run for governor is very much grounded in the values that led me to get involved in public service in the first place. I was a kid whose life was saved by public schools. Both my parents were educators, but they both passed away when I was a kid. My mom passed away when I was 8, October of 4th grade. My dad passed away when I was 12. He'd been struggling with undiagnosed Alzheimer's. So home was this environment that was unstable and difficult and scary a lot of the time. But school was the place that was safe and compelling and engaging and gave me a sense of hope and purpose. And later, when I was a teenager, like a lot of teenagers who have experienced trauma, I really struggled. And I actually got kicked out of high school. I always tell people I'm the first U.S. Secretary of Education who have been kicked out of high school. But again, it was teachers and a school counselor who invested in me and gave me a second chance. And because of them, I became a teacher and a principal and tried to do for other kids what teachers had done for me. I had the chance, to serve at the state level, the federal level. But as an educator, you always see how kids and families are affected by whether or not they have safe and affordable housing, whether or not their families gotten caught up in our policies of mass incarceration as a country, whether or not they have health insurance, whether or not their parents can find a good job. And so I've gotten more and more involved in a range of issues, policy issues that affect kids and families, and decided, look, governors are uniquely positioned to make sure that government is helping make people's lives better. And I love Maryland. I raised my family here in Montgomery County, and I think I can contribute, so I'm running.
Now, with this obviously being your first foray into political office, you know about politics, being that you work for the federal government. Mm-hmm. You have a few of your opponents who have held regional or state offices. Now, how do you convince Maryland voters, especially those who actually have supported Governor Hogan because of him being viewed by some as moderate and who's willing to go that middle ground? How do you convince a few of those that you would be able to govern on a statewide level?
Yeah, such an important question. Look, when I was Secretary of Education, our budget was about $15-20 billion larger than the budget of the state of Maryland. So I come to this race with real executive experience, getting things done in government. And what I want to try to present to people is a vision for how we move forward. Look, I think Governor Hogan deserves credit for being a Trump critic. We need Republicans who are Trump critics, but we have a lot of missed opportunities in this state. We could have the best education system in the country. We don't. We need to invest more in our schools, particularly our schools serving our highest needs students. We could have universal access to quality childcare and pre-K in the state. We don't. We need to do that. We could be investing so much more in our HBCUs and driving economic opportunity for a next generation of young people. We haven't done enough there. We could have an economy that's growing great new jobs in renewable energy, in biotech. And even though Governor Hogan presents himself as pro-business, we actually don't have the kind of robust economic growth, innovation-driven economy we should, and we particularly don't see the level of support and investment in businesses owned by people of color that we need. We have a significant racial wealth gap that we need to tackle. So what I want to present to folks is, what does the next 8 years look like? How does government become a partner in helping people improve their lives?
It was funny you mentioned about, in terms of Governor Hogan being critical of what former President Donald Trump was. If I'm not mistaken, you think you were the first candidate who released a statement about the Republican delegate Daniel Cox running, who's, for those who don't know, who's a Donald Trump supporter, who also helped lead in the January 6th insurrection for people in the state. And I want to make sure, read just part of your statement. Quote, "We simply cannot risk having a QAnon conspiracist who decries public health measures, promotes the big lie, and help promote an insurrection leading our state. Maryland is better than Delegate Cox." That's end quote. So what made you release that statement, sir?
Look, I think we have to be very clear as a country that we reject racism, that we reject fascism and efforts to overturn election outcomes that are fairly decided. We have to reject anti-science views that make everyone less safe and undermine our public health. And Dan Cox is all those things. And he's a representation of the Trump worldview, an anti-science, bigoted, anti-democratic worldview. And we have to reject that in the state. And I think voters will reject that. And look, Andy Harris, Congressman Andy Harris, is also a part of that insurrectionist sympathizer movement. And I hope we reject him as well.
Thank you, sir. And there was one to talk about, switch to a different topic very quickly. Senate President Bill Ferguson and Speaker Jones, they recently announced a 7-member legislative redistricting advisory commission. So just wanted to get your thoughts about gerrymandering.
Look, I think it's important that districts represent communities and that they're organized in a way that isn't designed to reach a particular political outcome, but is designed to best represent the people of their district. That said, I think if we have a fair redistricting process, we will see that voters in Maryland reject Andy Harris, and I think we will have an entirely Democratic congressional delegation.
Okay. Wanted to make sure, I have a couple more questions left. I want to make sure you get to talk about this personal aspect. And you talked a bit before about it, about in your quest in becoming the state's first Black governor. Can you summarize for those who don't know about your great-grandfather who was enslaved right in Montgomery County? Besides your immediate family, does he have a major influence on you running?
Yeah, look, so I'm talking to you from Silver Spring, where I live with my family. We have had the chance to visit the property where my great-grandfather was enslaved in Gaithersburg. The property is still owned by the family that are direct line descendants of the family that owned my family. They've maintained the property almost exactly as it was in 1863. The main house is the house that was built in the 1700s, and the cabin in which my great-grandfather and his family lived as enslaved people is still standing on the property. So I've had the opportunity to stand in that cabin with my wife, with my daughters, and really contemplate two things. One, how recent the institution of slavery is, and how intimate the institution of slavery was. I mean, that cabin is not 30 yards from the house. So these were two families living together in the same space, but one owned the other. But I've also had the chance, standing in that cabin with my daughters, to contemplate the fact that in 3 generations, my family went from enslaved in that cabin to serving in the cabinet of the first Black president. That's what's possible when we create paths to opportunity in people's lives, which for me in part was my grandmother getting to go to University of Maryland Eastern Shore and graduating there in 1894. So we have to create those paths to opportunity for folks. That's why I'm running for governor. I hope people will follow us at johnkingforgovernor.com and get involved in the campaign.
Yeah, just really quick question. So when you're not out campaigning, what does John King like to do just to relax himself?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have two daughters. They are 15 and 17. So one of the most relaxing things is spending time hanging out with them, supporting them, cheering them on. My older daughter is an actress. My younger daughter is a track star, we like to say in our family, and so I like to cheer her on when she has a track meet, and I like to attend my older daughter's performances. But investing in our children and in our family always has to come first.
Thank you, Secretary King. Appreciate your time, sir. Good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you.